The August air in Manhattan was heavy with the scent of champagne and the low thrum of expensive laughter. From the rooftop terrace of the Argent Hotel, the city glittered below like 1,000 promises waiting to be bought. Ethan Cole stood near the railing, drink in hand, his navy suit tailored so precisely it could have been sewn onto his skin. The party was a familiar scene for him. Beautiful women with legs like blades, businessmen with smiles sharpened by ambition, and the unspoken hierarchy that always put Ethan somewhere near the top. That night, Damian West was in rare form. The two men had known each other since college friends by association, rivals by instinct. Damian leaned against the bar, swirling a glass of scotch with the ease of someone who lived for provocation. His eyes tracked Ethan as he spoke to a pair of models, his trademark smirk already curling at the edges. "You're predictable, Cole," Damian said when Ethan finally approached. "Always the same type-perfect hair, perfect figure, perfect emptiness." Ethan raised an eyebrow, sipping his drink. "It's called having standards, Damian. You should try it sometime." Damian's smirk widened. "Standards? Or a fear of anything that might challenge your precious image?" He paused, letting the words sink in, then leaned forward. "I bet you wouldn't have the guts to marry someone the tabloids wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. Someone who doesn't fit into your perfect little glass box." Ethan laughed, the sound rich and unbothered. "Name your price." $2 million. Damian's voice cut through the rooftop noise like a blade. 6 months. You marry her, stay married, and I wire you the money. But if you back out or can't handle it, you pay me the same. Ethan's eyes gleamed. "And who exactly do you have in mind?" Damian didn't hesitate. "Sophie Bennett. She runs a pastry shop in Brooklyn. She's not your type. At all. She's big, loud, doesn't give a damn what people think. The kind of woman who'd wipe frosting on her dress and laugh about it." For a moment, Ethan pictured it a stranger, standing beside him at galas and dinners, her presence sending the society pages into a quiet meltdown. The idea wasn't appealing, but it was a challenge. And Ethan Cole never turned down a challenge. "Fine," Ethan said, holding out his hand. "Send me her details. I'll have her say yes before the week's over." The following Thursday, he walked into a small bakery that smelled like warm sugar and cinnamon. Behind the counter, Sophie Bennett was piping frosting onto a cake, her dark hair tied back loosely, her cheeks flushed from the heat of the ovens. She glanced up when he entered, her eyes flicking over him in a way that felt assessing. Not impressed, not intimidated, just taking stock. "You must be Ethan Cole," she said, her voice rich and steady. "And you must be Sophie Bennett," he replied, offering his hand. She didn't take it right away. "I know why you're here," she said plainly. "I know about the bet, the terms, the conditions. And before you start your pitch, yes, I'll marry you. For 6 months. She set the piping bag down and finally shook his hand, her grip firm. "But don't think for 1 second you're the one running this game." For the first time in a long while, Ethan Cole wasn't sure if he'd just made the smartest bet of his life, or the first mistake he couldn't buy his way out of. Asterisk, asterisk, the wedding was exactly as Ethan Cole preferred: fast, efficient, and tailored to his advantage. No family members cluttering the guest list, no sentimental speeches to slow things down, just the legal signatures, a photographer to ensure the gossip columns got their headlines, and Sophie Bennett in a simple navy dress that fit her comfortably, not strategically. She didn't try to hide her size, didn't smooth herself into something more acceptable for the society pages. If anything, she seemed to revel in the whispers she knew were flying around the room. Ethan thought he would feel triumphant. After all, the first step of the bet was complete. He had convinced her to marry him in less than a week. But as they stepped into the waiting black car, Sophie turned to him with a smile that wasn't quite a smile. "You're used to winning before the game even starts, aren't you?" she asked. The question was casual, but it lodged in his mind. Like a splinter, their arrival at Ethan's penthouse was meant to impress. The private elevator opened to a sprawling, glass-walled living space that overlooked the entire Manhattan skyline. Chandeliers sparkled overhead, and every surface gleamed, like it had been polished within an inch of its life. Ethan expected Sophie to wander the space with awe, maybe even ask about the price of some of the custom Italian furniture. Instead, she dropped her small overnight bag by the door, walked straight to the floor-to-ceiling windows, and stared out at the view. "You must love this," she said, her voice unreadable. "I do," Ethan replied smoothly, stepping beside her. "I worked for every inch of it." Sophie's reflection in the glass shifted slightly, her lips curving. "Worked for it? Or took it?" The words hit with an unexpected weight. Ethan masked his reaction with a short laugh, but something in her tone told him she wasn't simply making idle conversation. The next few days unfolded like a test Ethan hadn't studied for. He planned dinners at Michelin-starred restaurants, afternoons with stylists who could refine her look, even a spa day at one of the city's most exclusive retreats. Sophie declined every offer with polite firmness. Instead, she woke early each morning, dressed in jeans and an apron, and left for her bakery job, as if the penthouse were just a convenient crash pad. "You don't have to work anymore," Ethan told her over coffee one morning. "You're married to me now." "I know," Sophie said, stirring her mug, "but you're married to me now, too. And I'm not changing my life because of a 6-month arrangement." The line was delivered without malice, but it had a sting. All the same dotted social events, Sophie refused to play the role Ethan envisioned. When introduced to his polished friends, she didn't flatter or feign interest in their hollow conversations. She asked pointed questions about their investments, their treatment of employees, their politics that left some of them shifting uncomfortably. Ethan noticed how her laughter, loud and unapologetic, often drew more attention than the designer gowns and tuxedos surrounding her. He tried to reassert control. He booked her calendar without asking, arranging photo shoots and charity appearances, but she canceled them as easily as deleting a text. When he confronted her, she simply said, "You want a wife for the bet. I agreed to be that. But I'm not your prop, Ethan." At night, when the city's lights stretched like a constellation across the skyline, Ethan would glance at Sophie reading on the couch, her hair loose around her shoulders, her expression focused and calm. She wasn't impressed by his money, wasn't moved by his charm. If anything, it felt like she was watching him, taking measure of his every move. One evening, as he poured himself a drink, he caught her gaze from across the room. "You're quiet tonight," he said. She closed her book, set it on the coffee table, and smiled slowly, deliberately. "I'm just thinking about how interesting it is to watch someone who thinks they're in control, only to realize they might not be." The remark lingered in the air long after she left the room, her footsteps soft against the marble floor. Ethan stared into his glass, unsettled. Somewhere between the wedding and this moment, he realized Sophie Bennett had stopped being a simple wager. She had become a puzzle he didn't yet understand, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he had the pieces to solve it. The third week of their marriage began with a change in the air that Ethan couldn't quite name. It wasn't something Sophie said, or did. It was subtler than that. A shift in her rhythm, a new energy in her presence. She still woke before him, still left for the bakery before the sun cleared the skyline. But when she returned, there was an undercurrent in her gaze, as though she was cataloging something, or preparing for something. Ethan told himself he didn't care. He buried himself in meetings, deals, and evening events, but somehow, no matter how tightly he gripped his world, Sophie was finding ways to seep into it. It began one Tuesday evening when she appeared in the kitchen, hair pulled back, wearing a plain gray t-shirt and flour-dusted jeans. She placed 2 plates on the counter, steam curling from roasted chicken and vegetables, the scent warm and inviting. "I thought you'd be at the Caro Foundation dinner," she said. "I was invited," Ethan replied, loosening his tie. "But I wasn't in the mood for rubber chicken and hollow conversations." Sophie's smile was small, almost imperceptible. "Then sit, eat." They sat across from each other in the soft glow of the pendant lights, the city a shimmering backdrop beyond the windows. For the first time, Ethan noticed how Sophie's hands moved when she spoke, graceful, deliberate, with a quiet confidence. He asked about the bakery, half expecting her to give a generic answer, but instead she launched into a story about a customer who'd been coming every Thursday for 20 years. She described the woman's laugh, the way she always bought 2 croissants, one for herself, one for the man she lost 50 years ago, but still visited every week at the cemetery. Ethan didn't realize he was holding his breath until Sophie finished the story. It was such a simple thing, yet it carried a depth he wasn't used to. In his world, people didn't cling to sentiment, they clung to profit. The next morning, he found her at the dining table, sipping coffee while reading an old, worn recipe book. Without looking up, she said, "You don't notice the small things, do you?" Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" "You notice deals, numbers, people who can get you what you want. But the small things, the things that really make life worth something, you overlook them." The words settled between them like an accusation. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but found nothing to say. She closed the book, met his gaze, and his. For a moment, he felt as though she could see right through the polished armor he'd worn for years. That weekend, Sophie agreed to accompany him to a private art auction. It should have been his arena, wealthy patrons, fine wine, quiet nods of approval, but Sophie moved through the crowd like she owned it. When a woman in a diamond necklace made a cutting remark about how refreshing it was to see Ethan bringing community outreach into his dating life, Sophie smiled sweetly and replied, "Don't worry, dear. If I decide to do outreach, I'll be sure to start with you." The room stilled for a fraction of a second, then erupted in muffled laughter. Ethan should have been embarrassed. Instead, he felt something else, an unfamiliar pull toward her. Boldness, her refusal to shrink. Later that night, as they stood on the balcony with the city spread beneath them, Ethan poured them each a glass of wine. "You enjoy making me uncomfortable," he said. Sophie took the glass, her eyes reflecting the lights below. "I enjoy making people think," she replied. Then, after a pause, "And you, Ethan Cole, are long overdue for some thinking." Her words lingered long after she went inside, her figure disappearing into the warm light of the penthouse. Ethan stayed out in the cool night air, the glass heavy in his hand, realizing with a quiet unease that Sophie Bennett was no longer just resisting his control, she was dismantling it, piece by piece. Asterisk, asterisk, by the 4th month, the lines of battle between Ethan and Sophie had shifted in ways he hadn't anticipated. What had started as his calculated game to control the marriage was now slipping into something more dangerous. She was the one setting the tempo, and he was reacting. Ethan told himself he was still in charge, but every time he tried to maneuver Sophie into the role he'd envisioned, she found a way to turn the situation on its head. It began with the charity gala. Ethan had spent weeks planning the event to showcase his influence, handpicking the guest list and reserving a table in the center of the ballroom. Sophie was meant to be his silent, polished accessory, dressed by one of his favored designers in something sleek and slimming. The morning of the gala, the gown was delivered in a garment bag worth more than most people's rent. Sophie unzipped it, studied the deep emerald silk, and calmly hung it in the back of the closet. That evening, she stepped out of the bedroom. In a flowing crimson dress she had bought herself, its bold color making no attempt to hide her figure. The fabric moved when she walked, alive with a confidence that belonged to her alone. Ethan tried to protest, but she silenced him with a single glance, the kind that said she'd wear what she pleased. In the ballroom, she was magnetic. While Ethan's colleagues and rivals exchanged rehearsed pleasantries, Sophie cut straight to the core of every conversation. She asked the CEO of a billion-dollar firm what his company was doing to protect low-income tenants from rising rents, leaving him fumbling for an answer. She told a senator's wife that her charity luncheons looked more like fashion parades than actual community work. And then, when it was her turn to speak from the stage, a brief introduction Ethan had arranged for her to thank donors. Sophie abandoned the pre-written remarks entirely. Her voice carried through the glittering room. We spend so much time talking about charity, but not enough about humanity. If the only time we open our wallets is when there are cameras flashing, then we're not giving, we're auditioning. And I, for one, am not interested in putting on a show. The applause was hesitant at first, then grew. Phones came out, recording. By the end of the night, her words were trending online. Social media hailed her as the fearless wife of Ethan Cole, praising her authenticity and calling her a refreshing voice in a sea of hollow glamour. Ethan's meticulously crafted image, however, took a hit. The press didn't focus on his sponsorship of the event. They focused on her. In the days that followed, Sophie's influence only spread. Invitations arrived for interviews, panel discussions, and community events, always addressed to her. When Ethan tried to decline on her behalf, she accepted anyway. Soon she was appearing at neighborhood fundraisers in Brooklyn, visiting schools, speaking about self-worth and resilience. And somehow, in every clip and every article, the man who was supposed to be the center of the story became little more than the husband in the background. Ethan began noticing something else. People looked at her differently. At first, it was curiosity. How did she land him? But now it was respect, admiration. Some even seemed to forget who the wealthy spouse in the relationship was. One night, after she returned from a community meeting in the Bronx, Ethan confronted her. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Watching me fade into the background, Sophie tilted her head, her expression unreadable. "I'm not making you fade, Ethan. I'm just not dimming myself to make you shine brighter." He searched her face for some crack, some sign that she was bluffing, but all he found was calm certainty. And beneath it, a flicker of something sharper, something that told him she was still holding cards he hadn't seen yet. That night, Ethan lay awake in the darkened bedroom, staring at the ceiling, while Sophie's breathing remained steady beside him. He was beginning to understand the truth. The game he thought he was playing had changed, and the rules now belonged to her. The rain fell hard against the penthouse windows the night Ethan decided he'd had enough of living in the dark. For weeks, Sophie had been steering the narrative, turning public opinion, commanding the room at events, earning respect from people who barely acknowledged him anymore. She had made herself untouchable, not through wealth, but through something Ethan couldn't buy: authenticity. And the more he thought about it, the more one question gnawed at him. Why had she agreed to marry him in the first place? It wasn't for money. He knew that now. Sophie wasn't the type to care about his bank accounts or his penthouse. And it wasn't for social status. If anything, she seemed to relish making the elite uncomfortable. There had to be another reason, a deeper one. He found her in the kitchen that night, sitting at the counter with a mug of tea, her hair damp from the rain. She'd been out all afternoon, and he had no idea where. "We need to talk," Ethan said, his tone sharper than he intended. Sophie glanced up, calm as ever. "About what?" "About why you're here," he replied. "Why you said yes to the bet." "Because you could have refused. And yet you didn't. You stepped right into it like you were waiting for the offer. So tell me, what's your angle? For a moment, she said nothing. Just sipped her tea, the faint clink of ceramic against her ring the only sound. Then she set the cup down slowly, her eyes locking on his with a weight that made the room feel smaller. You want the truth, Ethan? She asked quietly. Yes, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Her gaze didn't waver. Years ago, before your glass towers and luxury deals made you untouchable, you bought a block of property in Brooklyn. There was a bakery there. Small, family-owned place. My family's place. You wanted the land for a condo project. We refused to sell. You forced us out anyway. Ethan felt a flicker of recognition, but it was distant, buried under years of transactions. I don't remember. Of course you don't, she cut in, her voice sharp now. You don't remember because it was just business to you. But to us, it was our life. That bakery had been in my family for 3 generations. My father poured his soul into it. When you took it, you didn't just take a building. You took the last piece of him that was alive. He never recovered. Her voice faltered, but her eyes burned. He died within a year. Heart attack, they said. I call it heartbreak. The words hit Ethan like a cold blade sliding under his ribs. He opened his mouth, but she wasn't finished. When Damien told me about the bet, I saw my chance. Sophie continued. Not for your money. Not for revenge in the way you're thinking. I wanted to see you up close, Ethan. To see if the man who destroyed my family could feel anything. To see if you are even capable of guilt. He stood frozen, his mind flashing through memory after memory of deals made without thought, names forgotten as soon as contracts were signed. Faces blurred together. But now, Sophie's face was sharp and unrelenting, forcing him to see the cost of what he had done. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole had no words. Sophie leaned back in her chair, her tone suddenly calm again. 6 months. That's all we agreed to. But by the end, Ethan, you're going to know what it feels like to lose something you can't buy back. Her words lingered in the air long after she left the kitchen, her footsteps fading down the hall. Ethan remained at the counter, staring at the half-empty mug she'd left behind, the steam curling upward like a taunt. And for the first time since the bet began, he wondered if he had already lost long before Sophie ever said yes. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He lay in the dark, the city lights bleeding faint gold through the curtains. Sophie's words replaying in his head like a sentence handed down from a judge. He had built his life on the idea that business was war and feelings were irrelevant. Now, for the first time, the casualties had a face, and that face shared his bed. The following morning, Sophie moved through the penthouse as if nothing had happened. She made her coffee, tied her hair back, and left for the bakery without a glance in his direction. But for Ethan, the air in the room was different, thicker, harder to breathe. The knowledge of what he had done, of what she had lost, gnawed at him with every step. He spent the day in his office, staring at contracts he couldn't bring himself to sign. Instead of focusing on quarterly reports, his mind drifted back to the small details she'd told him, the bakery, her father's pride, the stubborn refusal to sell. In her story, he wasn't just a businessman. He was the villain. By late afternoon, Ethan made a decision. If Sophie had come into this marriage to see whether he could feel guilt, then he would show her something more. He would show her he could change. A first step was quiet. No grand declarations, no showy gestures. He called an old contact in city development and began tracing the paper trail of the property he had taken from her family. It took days, but eventually he found it, the empty shell of a building, still in his company's portfolio, collecting dust while a newer project took priority. He had never thought about it twice. Now it consumed him, Over the next week, Ethan kept his movements discreet. He met with architects, planners, and contractors, all under the guise of a private project. He repurchased the antique ovens that had been auctioned off years ago. He tracked down the original bakery's sign, faded, chipped, but still intact, and had it restored. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of the money, but because every meeting, every detail was a reminder of how easily he had erased her family's legacy. At home, Sophie remained distant. She still shared meals with him on occasion, but her conversation was clipped, her eyes always guarded. Yet Ethan noticed small cracks in the armor, how she paused just a little longer when he asked about her day, how her gaze softened when he laughed at one of her sharp remarks. One night, as they sat on opposite ends of the couch, Sophie glanced at him over the rim of her mug. "You've been quieter lately," she said. "I've been thinking," Ethan replied carefully. "That's new," she said with a faint smirk, but her tone lacked the bite it once carried. He let it go, resisting the urge to tell her what he was doing. He didn't want her to think it was another manipulation, another play for control. This had to be real, and she had to feel it for herself when the time came. Meanwhile, Sophie's public influence continued to grow. Invitations poured in from community groups, and she accepted them all, speaking at youth centers, small business panels, even a local radio show. Ethan watched from the sidelines, sometimes in person, sometimes through live streams, and every time he did, he saw more of what had drawn people to her. She was unpolished in the best way, warm, genuine, unafraid to call out hypocrisy. For Ethan, each appearance was a double-edged sword. He admired her more with every speech, but it also deepened the guilt in his chest. She had built herself into something extraordinary, despite what he'd done to her. Not because of it. As the 6th month of their marriage drew closer, Ethan's project neared completion. The restored bakery was nearly ready, ovens polished, counters rebuilt, the sign glowing softly above the door. He visited one evening after the workers had gone, standing in the middle of the empty space. He could almost hear the echo of her father's laughter, the clatter of trays, the scent of fresh bread. For the first time in years, Ethan felt small in a way that wasn't humiliating. It was humbling. Back at the penthouse, Sophie was reading at the kitchen island when he walked in. She looked up briefly, then back to her book. "Long day?" "Yeah," he said, pouring himself a glass of water. She didn't press for details, and he didn't offer them. But as he stood there, watching her turn the page with quiet focus, Ethan realized something terrifying. He didn't care about the bet anymore. Winning, losing, it meant nothing. The only thing that mattered was the look on her face when she saw what he'd done, and whether, for even a second, it would make her believe he could be more than the man who took everything from her. The morning of the 6th month's final day broke cold and silver over Manhattan, the kind of winter light that made the city look carved from steel. Ethan had been awake for hours, pacing the length of the penthouse, checking his watch, replaying every moment of the past weeks. Today was the day the 6-month marriage contract ended, the day the bet was supposed to be settled. But the bet no longer mattered, not to him. He wasn't thinking about Damayan's smug face or the $2 million that had once driven his decision. He was thinking about Sophie, and about the look in her eyes when she finally saw what he had rebuilt. She emerged from the bedroom around 9, her hair loose, her sweater soft and oversized, cradling a mug of coffee as if it were a shield. She didn't notice him at first, her gaze drifting to the city through the windows. Ethan took a breath. "Come with me," he said. Sophie turned, one eyebrow arching. "Where?" "You'll see." She hesitated, clearly weighing whether this was worth her time, but something in his voice must have tipped the scale. She set her coffee down and grabbed her coat. The drive was quiet. Ethan kept his eyes on the road, resisting the urge to fill the silence. Sophie watched the city pass, her expression unreadable. When they crossed into Brooklyn, her attention sharpened. She frowned slightly as he turned down a street she clearly recognized. The car stopped in front of a modest building tucked between a laundromat and a florist. The bricks had been cleaned, the windows polished, and above the door, a freshly restored sign hung proudly. Bennett's Bakery. Sophie froze. For a moment, she didn't breathe. Slowly, she stepped out of the car, her boots crunching against the thin layer of snow. Ethan followed at a distance, his chest tight. She reached out, her gloved fingers brushing the wooden frame of the door before pushing it open. Warm light spilled out over them, carrying the scent of fresh bread and cinnamon. Inside, the countertops gleamed. The display cases were empty but ready, and in the back, the antique ovens stood like sentinels of a past reborn. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "How?" "I found it in my company's portfolio," Ethan said quietly. "It was sitting there, empty, forgotten. I bought it back. Had it restored to exactly how it was. I tracked down the original ovens, the sign, every detail." Sophie turned to face him, her eyes shining, not with the unshakable confidence he was used to, but with something rawer, more vulnerable. "Why?" "Because I can't undo what I did to your family," he said, his voice steady. "I can't bring your father back, but I can give this back to you. I can start making things right. Not for the bet, not to win. For you." For a long moment, she just stared at him, her breath visible in the cool air of the shop. Then, slowly, she stepped closer. "You think this changes what you did?" "No," he admitted. "But I hope it changes what I am." She looked away, taking. In the bakery again, her hands tracing the edge of the counter, as if reacquainting herself with an old friend. "There's something you should know," she said finally, her voice low. Ethan's pulse quickened. "When Damien told me about the bet," she continued, "he didn't just tell me your type or your arrogance. He told me this could be a chance for closure. What I didn't tell you is that Damien and I were engaged once, years ago. He knew my history with you. He set the bet in motion, thinking it would humiliate you, maybe even ruin you. But I agreed for my own reasons." The revelation struck like a physical blow. Damien hadn't just been playing a game. He had been orchestrating the board from the start. Sophie's gaze found his again. "I thought I'd spend 6 months proving to myself that you were exactly who I believed you to be. Ruthless, cold, incapable of change. But somewhere along the way, you surprised me. And that, I didn't expect." Ethan took a step toward her, his throat tight. "Does that mean?" "It means," she said, a small, almost reluctant smile touching her lips, "that I'm not ready to walk away, not yet." Relief washed over him like heat in the cold. He didn't reach for her. He let the moment settle between them, fragile and real. The bakery smelled of beginnings, not endings. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had happened. But inside Bennett's Bakery, the man who had once destroyed a family's legacy and the woman who had sworn to make him see the cost stood together, not as adversaries bound by a bet, but as something far more dangerous and precious. Two people who had the power to choose each other, despite everything.